A West African court has dismissed a case filed by Niger's military leaders which sought to lift a raft of sanctions imposed by the regional bloc, ECOWAS, on the country after a coup in July. The transitional government that was set up by the junta had told the Abuja-based ECOWAS Community Court of Justice that the sanctions, which included border closures by Niger's neighbors and a cut in power supplies by Nigeria, had led to a shortage of medicines and food, and that in turn, they say, are causing hardships on the country's citizens. The court, however, dismissed the case, saying that the junta was not qualified to launch a case on Niger's behalf. Niger's government in October said it had cut its planned spending for 2023 by 40% due to the sanctions imposed after the July power grab by the military, and that has further hobbled the economy in one of the world's poorest countries. A West African court, essentially the ECOWAS Court of Justice, has basically thrown out a case that was filed by Niger's military rulers. They were seeking to have sanctions imposed on the country after a coup in July declared to be essentially a bit illegal. But the court disagreed. Among other things, they essentially argued that, look, the military junta is not a recognized government and therefore lacks the locus to institute this action. Let's dive into the details of this. Deji Bademosi is joining us from Lagos with a bit more details. So, Deji, ECOWAS's top court basically tossing out this case. Do we know what the next move from the country's military rulers will be?
Well, first off, Rama, it's not a surprise that the court tossed off the case. That was expected. Of course, the authorities of Niger will now do is probably to go back to see if they can actually try to strike a deal with ECOWAS. I mean, they still have to rely on that negotiation. The president of Togo was in Benin earlier today, and of course he's the mediator now between ECOWAS and the military regime in Niger. So it's now up to that military regime to take this mediation process very seriously and try to see if they can reach an agreement with ECOWAS, especially in terms of their transition program and what have you. So I think that's just the only option they've got left, because there's just no court for them to go to now, and there's just no way they can force ECOWAS to lift the sanctions. So at the end of the day, this would have to be resolved through dialogue, and I do not see any other way to resolve these other than dialogue. So it's now up to the authorities in Niger to give, to begin to concentrate more on the process of dialogue and try to reach some kind of agreement with ECOWAS to lift the sanctions.
All right, then. So give us a sense of what trade has been like, right? Since these sanctions were imposed on the country, what has cross-border trade been like between Nigeria and Niger? Are we seeing a lot more informal trade, perhaps a bit more smuggling happening across the border?
Well, first off, formal trade doesn't exist anymore. Informal trade, too, has been badly affected. In fact, the closure of the border has taken a toll on not just the citizens of Niger, too, even Nigerians, too, who live around the border. So smuggling, no doubt, is thriving now as we speak. But then, I mean, you just cannot compare the situation to what it was when the border was open, because when you have smuggling in place, what you're going to have is that the cost of some of these smuggled items now would definitely shoot up, and that's what we're seeing in Niger, where the prices of some imported items now have actually gone up by over 300%, and it's just because most of these items are now smuggled. So it's just normal. So the people have been badly affected in Niger, especially the ordinary people now. The price of almost everything has gone up. Don't also forget, businesses have been very badly affected because Nigeria has cut off electricity supply. So for most businesses, they are turning to generators. And for those who cannot afford to do that, they are shutting down. The price of rice has gone up. The price of basically every commodity has gone up. And it's the reason why the authorities were hoping to get a favorable judgment now from the ECOWAS court, but then that did not happen. So this is it's a big challenge, especially for the ordinary Nigerian citizens, and also for Nigerians too who live around the border area. Remember, Niger shares about a 1,600 kilometer border with Nigeria. So those Nigerians who are living around the border area, they are feeling the impact, and it's the reason why you see especially lawmakers now from that area are pushing ECOWAS to lift this sanction. So it affects both sides, but seriously, Niger is badly affected, and that is why the authorities there would do anything now to get the sanctions lifted. I mean, we're talking about a situation where we're seeing blackouts in Niamey, places like Maradi and Zinda. So it's a huge one for Niger.
One last question for you, and this focuses on what you've actually just brought up, because heads of state from ECOWAS member states, they'll be in Abuja this weekend. What should we expect on the agenda, especially with respect to the unconstitutional power grabs that we've seen not just in Niger, but also in Mali and Burkina Faso?
Well, unfortunately, we haven't seen any progress at all in terms of the deadline now given. I mean, in terms of the conditions now given by ECOWAS to some of these countries. You know that in Mali, for instance, the transition program there is in a stalemate. And in Niger, it's almost the same thing. Burkina Faso, same thing as well. And, you know, the various military regimes are consolidating their hold on power, not giving any impression at all that they are ready to leave anytime soon. So obviously, that all these issues will be discussed at that meeting. But most importantly, of course, would be what President Yadema would bring back from Niger, because he's the mediator now. I mean, he's been there earlier today to speak with the authorities there. So the ECOWAS leaders now would want to hear from him and know what the thinking is in Niger in terms of complying with the conditions now that ECOWAS set. Of course, the issues of the sanctions will be discussed. Remember, before now, some members of the ECOWAS parliaments actually called on ECOWAS to leave the sanctions, or at least lift some aspects of the sanctions. So all of that will be discussed, but we just have to wait and see what happens. But it's not looking like we're going to see the lifting of those sanctions now anytime soon, especially now that the ECOWAS court has given a judgment on this case. So much will depend on what the president of Togo brings back, and if, for instance, in the case of Niger, the authorities there are ready to deal with ECOWAS and probably roll out a transition program that is agreeable to ECOWAS, and then release the deposed president who is still being held at the presidential palace.